After 25 years in office, Vladimir Putin is no stranger to gilded gold or red carpets. A ceremony like this, a gaudy reminder of his power, and a rebuke to every Western leader who's tried to bring him to heel over Ukraine. His guest today is the President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. Their economies both dependent on a high price of oil. Mr. Putin hinting that the UAE might host his meeting with America's president next week, the first in 4 years and a major feather in the Russian leader's cap. But as for meeting President Zelenskyy, well, he'd clearly rather not.
I have repeatedly been saying that in general I have nothing against it. This is possible. But before that, certain conditions should be created. And unfortunately, we are still far from creating such conditions.
Which begs this question. Is Steve Witkoff, the Trump peace envoy who visited yesterday, being duped? Departing the Kremlin after Mr. Putin claimed he wanted peace, but in reality his terms unchanged, including Zelenskyy's removal. Even Mr. Trump, who tends to talk up his powers of diplomacy, is talking them down now.
How close do you think you are to some kind of deal?
Well, I don't want to say. I've been disappointed before with this one. I don't call it a breakthrough. I mean, we've been working on this a long time.
Back in February, Mr. Trump seemed to think he could steamroll Ukraine's leader into a peace deal.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
But America's president is now aiming his anger at Vladimir Putin, as Ukrainian civilians are continuously bombarded with Russian missiles and drones, with no ceasefire on offer, and with that, no Nobel Peace Prize for Mr. Trump either.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Trump called him and European leaders last night, but they're believed to be sceptical about any summit, fearing that Trump could try to impose a ceasefire which eventually allows Putin to annex Ukrainian territory.
It appears that Russia is now more inclined to consider a ceasefire. The pressure on them is working, but the main thing is to ensure that they don't deceive anyone with the details, neither us nor the United States.
Mr. Trump likes a historic meeting, though he may have learnt from this one in his first term, the last of 3 encounters with Kim Jong-un, North Korea's dictator.
It is good to see you again.
After which, the nuclear arsenal of one of the world's most repressive regimes only got bigger. So a big day in the spotlight with nothing to show for it.
Well, earlier I spoke to Fred Fleitz, who served on the National Security Council during President Trump's first term. And I began by asking him if he thought that the summit between Trump and Putin would actually go ahead.
It looks promising right now, and I think it shows how serious Putin takes Trump's ultimatum and promise that he's going to implement very tough energy sanctions. It also shows that Putin still wants to negotiate with Trump. Now, assuming Putin is sincere, I think it's very promising.
So you think the threat of sanctions and extra tariffs, sending 2 submarines, closer to Russia, do you think that's all worked?
Well, it's interesting that the Kremlin did not say that Trump's statements about the submarines was provocative and actually said that threats of nuclear war should be toned down, which I thought was a rebuke of Medvedev. And we've also heard that the Kremlin does not want to anger Trump. These are all good things. We never heard talk like that when Biden was president. I think Putin respects Trump. I don't know whether he's ready to make a deal, but it's good that they're talking.
Now, they have talked 6 times. I think they've had 6 telephone conversations since Trump took office. And the last time they spoke on the phone, Trump said he was very disappointed with Vladimir Putin. What do you think has changed for Trump?
Trump's very disappointed. He thinks Putin has disrespected him. Trump has really went all out, putting his whole foreign policy team on the field, made very generous offers, and Putin has not kept his agreements, and he's actually accelerated the war, which is why Trump adjusted his policies to sell weapons to Ukraine through NATO and to implement tough sanctions. But Trump still wants a deal, and his ultimate objective is to stop the killing in Ukraine. He'll talk about other aspects of this conflict later, but he's been saying for over 2 years now the killing has to stop.
There are people in Kyiv and there are people in the region, especially in the Baltic republics, who just don't trust that President Trump will put the Ukrainian side of it sufficiently to their adversary, Vladimir Putin.
Well, we know that Zelenskyy supports what Trump is trying to do, to get an immediate ceasefire. It took a while to get Zelenskyy to that position, and if Trump could pull that off with Putin, I think Zelenskyy would be very supportive.
And do you think that the Russians themselves are in a much weaker position now than they might have appeared just a few weeks ago? I mean, the economy, they've lost an awful lot of men. Their Iranian partners have been pummeled by the Israelis. They're not sending the drones over anymore, etc., etc. I mean, do you think Putin is in a weaker position than he was a few months ago?
I think that's probably true. I believe the Russian economy is in trouble and these sanctions really hurt. However, I think Russia could continue to fight on for a long time if it wanted to. Trump has to make the argument that only he can make an offer to Putin to end this war that will allow Putin to exit in a face-saving way and to reintegrate Russia into the community, not just of civilized states, but of Western states. And this may be Putin's only chance to do this.
Who knows what happens after Trump, or you might get an even angrier Trump in a couple of years' time. So this may be, for Russia, the best opportunity they've got.
No, I couldn't have put it better. And I think Trump needs to make the case, you don't know who's going to succeed me. If it's a Democrat, that Democrat will most certainly not make a deal to Putin. I don't think it will be. I don't think a Democrat will succeed Trump. But you never know what's going to happen in 2028. Putin really should make a deal with Trump right now. And look, let's be realistic. There's no European leader who would make a deal with Putin either. Trump's the only one on the international scene who can help Putin get out of this war.
But at the same time, there is nothing that suggests that Vladimir Putin does not still cling to his war aims, which is essentially the capitulation of Zelenskyy and Ukraine. And that, of course, is unacceptable to the Ukrainians, but also, I'm assuming, to Donald Trump and the Europeans.
We need an immediate ceasefire, but if we're going to have a long-term settlement, we have to have an agreement that Russia's not going to violate the agreement to the ceasefire. And there are many demands, as you said, that Trump has made that are just unacceptable to Ukraine and to Ukraine's continuation as a nation state.
Fred Flight speaking to me earlier there from Washington. Well, I'm now joined by the Ukrainian MP, Oleksandr Mereshko, who's chair of Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Committee. Oleksandr, it's good to have you back on the program. Do you think, do you suspect, do you fear that Steve Witkoff and Trump are being duped by Vladimir Putin?
I don't rule out this, unfortunately, because, the picture right now looks a little bit weird, because tomorrow is the deadline for the ultimatum established by President Trump for Putin. And we expected that President Trump will deliver on his promise if Putin disagrees with this request or offer, then President Trump will implement sanctions, including secondary sanctions. But instead of this, instead of punishment, we have reward for Putin, because summit with Putin is a kind of political reward for him, because it creates illusion that Putin is not politically isolated. And besides, we are going to have bilateral meeting. Previous administration has followed the principle, the basic principle in our relations, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And now we have violation of this principle. And, it looks really suspicious when great powers are trying to reach a deal behind the back of the victim of the aggression. Maybe it can happen at the expense of Ukraine. I don't know, but it looks suspicious.
But Oleksandr, I mean, at the same time, the White House has been briefing, a couple of journalists in Washington that actually the meeting will only take place if there's also a meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy, and that actually the sanctions, which are due to kick in tomorrow, will also still kick in tomorrow. I mean, that's what they've been briefing after the initial announcement from the Kremlin.
Well, first of all, it makes much more sense to have a different format of talks between, including Russia, including the United States, to get involved, first of all, President Zelenskyy, and also our European partners, including the UK, Germany, and France, It would make much more sense. As for sanctions, I'm really getting confused about what President Trump wants, what kind of sanctions he is going to apply, because before he was talking about secondary sanctions, now he's talking about tariffs. So I'm confused about his sanction policy.
Well, you're not the only one who's confused, frankly. But Trump has been on a bit of a journey, hasn't he? I mean, he's really playing down any possibilities of success. I mean, just speaking to the White House press corps in the Oval Office this afternoon, he's no longer sort of showing off with the idea that he's the Nobel Prize-winning peacemaker. It's different, isn't it? And he's also been on a bit of a journey with your president.
Yeah, definitely. I see certain progress. And sometimes Churchill was attributed this famous phrase that you can always count on Americans doing the right thing once they exhausted all the alternatives. And seems like President Trump is exhausting alternatives before doing the right thing. And I'm really hopeful about that.
If you look back at the last, since the beginning of the war, now 3.5 years ago, I mean, it's gone on for a hell of a long time. And there's been a lot of suffering, especially on your side. Do you think that you were better off under a more predictable President Biden than you are under an unpredictable President Trump that might actually, at the end of the day, bring about peace?
Well, it's hard to say because, we have no choice. We have to deal with the current president of the United States. We have to work with him, and we have no right to be pessimistic. In one of his interviews, Mr. Trump once said that his best advice to everyone would be never give up. So we have no right to give up on President Trump. And we remain hopeful, but we need to try to persuade him to move in the right direction and to understand those basic evident things which President Zelenskyy knows, that it's impossible, just impossible to make a deal with Putin.